Ruslan.
Some of you guys know this about me. I grew up in Vista, California, next to Camp Pendleton, one of the biggest Marine bases in California, one of the biggest in the country. And Camp Pendleton was the economy of Oceanside. A lot of Vista was around, so I grew up around a military presence. San Diego has 3 major military bases. You have the one in Miramar, that's also a Marine one, and then you also have the Navy in downtown San Diego. So I grew up around military as far back as I can remember, and more or less having a reverence, a respect, regardless on which wars we were fighting, what was going on, were they justified, were they not. Whenever you see young people, and by young people, I mean, there were folks that I knew that were 18, 19 years old. You might meet them playing basketball, you might meet them at church, and then you hear about him getting deployed. I remember early on even babysitting folks in my apartment complex. He was a Marine, and him and his wife will go out on date nights, and I get to watch their kid. This is probably like 16, 17 years old. So I've been around military presence my entire life, more so when I moved up to North County, San Diego. So I've always had a reverence and a respect for folks that have served our country, regardless on my political ideologies or if I agreed with whatever war that was happening at the time. I've always had a respect, always had an honor. And I think that's one of the proxies of being in a military type town. And so as we think about Memorial Day, as we think about reflecting those who served our country, and I'm always, again, learning new history. Lecrae posted something earlier regarding the history of Memorial Day, where it was black soldiers that died fighting in the Civil War, and them being put in mass graves, and then their bodies being dug up to honor them properly by other people who appreciated them fighting for the freedom. They say that's one of the histories of Memorial Day. I didn't have a chance to verify that, but that's floating around on social media today. And so this idea that I want to talk about, I'm going to have a Bible verse towards the end of this video that I don't want you to leave for, because it's going to glue this all together. If you're a follower of Jesus, if you live in this country, regardless on where you're at, gluing this idea together of remembrance, of honor, and how important that is for us on also the day of, I believe, the 100th anniversary of the Black Wall Street Tulsa Massacre. If you don't know what that is, you should look that up. That's trending all over the internet, where more or less in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you had an entire neighborhood rise up that was a black neighborhood that was completely self-sustainable and flourishing, and things escalated, crazy escalated over a what appeared to be some sort of confrontation between a black kid and a white girl, and then all of a sudden this entire thing exploded, and it was kind of dismissed as a quote-unquote race riot. And the way it was reported, and the more you peeled away, you realize there was over 300 approximately black people killed, businesses destroyed, and yet they still rebuilt Black Wall Street, and they still rebuilt this economy, though a lot of folks migrated out of Tulsa. And it has a super deep history. And then just Google black massacres and how many of those happen. A lot of folks just go, well, we just need to move on. We don't need to worry about the past. We need to move on. We need to stop thinking about yesterday. How are we ever going to talk about solutions if we're always remembering what happened, 100 years ago, 150 years ago? Why we got to talk about the Civil War? Why we got to talk about slavery? Why we got to talk about Black Wall Street? Why we got to talk about all these things? And it's quite simple to me, as someone who understands that the freedoms we have today, the liberties we have today, they come with the cost. Someone paid for this. Someone sacrificed. Whether that's folks who lost everything in Black Wall Street, whether that's the military, whether that's folks that were abolitionists and fought for folks to have freedom. Whatever we have today came at the expense of somebody willing to sacrifice something for it. And so I think it's important for us to know the history. It's important for us to take time and to take moments to reflect and think about those folks that have lost something at war, fighting for our country. Whether or not we agree with whatever specific war, in that moment, those young soldiers decided to do something extremely brave and courageous and go fight wars in other places of the world. And I think regardless on how we feel, we should respect, we should honor. To me, to see both of these things converge. And again, this isn't going to be an exhaustive video on Black Wall Street. You can look that up. They're all over Twitter. Some of you guys have never heard of it. Some of you guys have never heard about any of the black massacres that have happened in America. You think it just ended when slavery ended and then there was like civil rights, right? It's like 120 years of really terrible things that happened in New York with Seneca Village, in Detroit, in Philly, all over the South, of these communities sprouting up, and then people losing everything and then rebuilding and losing everything and rebuilding. And so I wanted to take a moment and point us to some passages to kind of glue this together. If you read the Old Testament, you see God constantly reminding his people what he did. I am the God of Jacob who delivered you from Egypt. I did this for you. Remember this. Remember this. Remember how I took you out of here. You were wandering in the desert for 40 years, but I delivered you from your enemies. There's a constant need, not need, but a constant presence in scripture to reflect and to remember. This is all throughout the Old Testament when God is communicating with the children of Israel. And in my personal life, what's been extremely fruitful, and I really do encourage you guys to do this. Those of you guys that are struggling with your intimacy with God, those of you guys that are struggling with maybe seeing some of the more supernatural hand in your life, I would highly encourage you to try doing a prayer journal and writing out your prayers. Really doing that, regardless on how trivial you think that prayer is, writing out your prayers every day if you can, and then come back to it a year from now. And then come back to it 5 years from now. Because we often forget how much God does and how much we progress and how much things change in our lives, how much things change in the grand scheme of things, because our memories are short, which I think that is why there's this consistent pressing in the scriptures. Remember, 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 remember. And I think this is all culminated by the ultimate act of sacrifice with Jesus going to the cross. Luke chapter 19, verse 22, he says, and he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it and gave it to them, saying, this is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way after that, he took the cup and said, this cup is my new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. We see Jesus saying, hey, do this communion thing. Do this ritual that is known as communion, and do this in remembrance of me. Do this when you come together. And there's all kinds of, disputes on, is communion just drinking Walter's grape juice and some little piece of bread, or is communion having a feast together? Regardless on how you celebrate communion, we are encouraged by Jesus, we are encouraged in 1 Corinthians to do it, and do it in remembrance of Jesus. And that it is this symbolic moment that we stop, we pause, and we reflect on the work of the cross, that the freedoms that we have spiritually, the freedoms that we have from sin, the freedoms that we have from demonic forces, the freedoms that we have from the wrath of God, spending an eternity apart from God, the freedoms that we have today came at a cost. Someone had to pay for them, and Jesus is the one who had to pay for them. And we ought to remember. We ought to remember and honor Jesus. We ought to remember those folks that came before us, whether they're church fathers or whether they're pillars here in our communities. Remembrance is good. It's sober. It gives us a sense of sobriety and a sense of reflection that sometimes we forget, because we're very quick to forget. So I want you guys to look at that passage, think of that in terms of remembrance and how valuable it is. And also, application point. I know application points aren't cool, but if you've never done a prayer journal, if you've never done a journal where you've made petitions, requests from God for your life, your family, your career, your future, and jotted those things down, If you've never done it, I highly recommend you do that. They say there's something that goes on in our brain when we write something down with a pen and onto paper. Something different happens in our psyche and in our understanding of things. And so taking notes down, they say it's stored in a different part of your brain. That's why in high school or in college, they told us to take notes. So I want you guys to try this. If you've never done this, pick yourself up a nice moleskin and just try writing down your prayer requests to God. And especially if you have trouble praying or you don't know how to pray. I love the Lord's Prayer, but sometimes just jotting down some praise reports that you have, jotting down some prayer requests that you have, and then, hey, come back to it every couple of weeks, every couple of months, and you'll be shocked. You'll be shocked how much God moves, but oftentimes we miss the move of God when we don't stop and take time to reflect, when we don't stop and take time to see our own heart changing, maybe, and even some of the things we're asking God for and some of the things we're praying for. But it really does start with being intentional to not forget, being intentional to remember, being intentional to know that the future is oftentimes determined by learning things from our past, by not repeating the same mistakes from our past. So that's why I'm grateful on this Memorial Day, man. Shout out to you guys. If anybody watching this has served our country in the military, thank you for your service. And so hopefully this is something that you guys can extract some practical value from. But I really want you guys to try this. If you've tried keeping a prayer journal, let me know. And if you haven't, I want you to try it.
King's Dream Entertainment. Ruslan.
Thank you so much for making it till the end of this video. If you found it valuable, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. Also, you can check out one of the other videos related to this that'll be over here, or check out more of my story. Now, I gotta tell you about a free training I have for anyone that is an entrepreneur, a creative, an artist, or just generally looking to get into the YouTube space, but maybe you are unsure on how to find your voice, how to find your niche, and how to create predictable success. I have a free training, Find Your YouTube Niche training, in the description of this video. Check it out. I promise you will find it valuable. Once again, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you, and I will see you on the next video. Joshua the king came down and bore it all. Yeah, conversations front of the fireplace. All of my mistakes, how do I erase? Wanna operate at a higher pace. Birth pains causing the body to dilate. On a first name basis with the worst pain facing. Moments in isolation. See, I was hoping I would do this to get more family time. A busy mind and worried heart is just not where I reside. I subscribed that all that traveling wasn't doing well for my soul. Glad I never made it when my name went through the rumor mill. I suppose that the Lord knows I'd have failed. Instead, I'm doing well at home, out my shell. Good book off the shelf, more dubs off the L's. I told Ray that